So welcome to episode 6 in this ongoing series where we're building a web application in FlutterFlow in 2024. This is a bumper-packed episode. We are going to focus on components and constants. We're going to have a little progress checkpoint first, and then we're going to get into the theory of components. We're going to understand why they are important to FlutterFlow, why they'll be important to our projects, and more specifically, how we're going to apply those in this particular project. And hopefully with everything you learn here, you'll be able to apply that in your own projects as well. And we're also, for good measure, going to touch on constants as well. We're going to use those with inside our components. So there's so much going on. Let's get into the video and let's get learning more about components. Okay, so here we are then with episode 6, and it feels like our journey has only really just begun with inside the fundamentals of FlutterFlow. You can see here that we've done our little quick tour. We've looked at the most essential areas of FlutterFlow to get ourselves up and running really, really quickly. And of course, as this series progresses, just like we did in the previous episode when we were talking about test modes, I'm going to introduce some of those more sort of information about the mechanics of FlutterFlow in those particular areas as we go through the series. And you can see here that we've covered styling and themes, and we've covered some of the widgets that we will use on a regular basis. Of course, FlutterFlow has so many more widgets that you can actually use with inside your projects. And of course, we'll introduce more of those as we progress through the series. And of course, there's other areas here that are really, really important to FlutterFlow that we've yet to touch on, but of course we will do in this particular series. But the one that we're going to focus on next is components. Components are a really important part to FlutterFlow in promoting good reusability within inside your application. So we're now going to go through some slides to discuss that a little bit more in depth. And then of course, we'll then move on to the second part of this particular video where we'll start actually creating components with inside our project. So without further ado, let's move on and let's now focus on components. Okay, so let's now talk a little bit about components. Now, on the screen at the moment, I've got a screen grab there of our running application. And I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to be, what do you see on this particular screen which looks like it's being used more than once? Well, it's quite obvious in as far as that you can see there that the sticky notes are being used more than once because we have 6 of them. But the only thing that's different about those sticky notes is the description of the text, the date, and the color. Now, that is a great candidate there for us to create a component, and we can promote good reusability in our application because by us creating a component, it means that we can dynamically then change the description text, the date, and the color that is being presented with inside the sticky note. Now, the fantastic thing is when our application then has like 20 or 30 or maybe 40 sticky notes, then we would only need to change the look and feel in one particular place if we are looking to make a change to our sticky note. And of course, that would then be kind of retrospectively then pushed right across the rest of our application. So that's great candidate for reusability there. Now, on the left-hand side, you can also see as well that we've got these sort of colored circles. Again, the only thing that is different about them is the fact is that there is a different color. So again, on that particular widget, we can be dynamic. We can provide what is called a component parameter to then just set the color of those particular components. So as these arrows are showing, these are all great candidates there for components. So moving on then, there's one extra thing that we can also do as well. I've just highlighted there a particular opportunity for us to create another component which kind of groups a load of other components together. So those little circle indicators there, they are also components themselves, and they're nested and embedded with inside a kind of a more parent component. And then that particular component is then placed on the home page. So that is what we're going to do in this particular episode, is we are going to focus on building that out as a component. And the good thing about that is it means it simplifies our home page. It means that as our widget tree hierarchy becomes quite complex, we then can offload the complexity to a component and we can work in that particular area, and then we don't then need to change the home page, which then hopefully will then reduce the complexity there as the application matures and gets more complex. So then moving on, then there's also another opportunity within inside components is that we can actually get our components to invoke actions on the actual parent page that it's actually in. So in our example here, that we've got a home page, and of course those sticky notes are on the home page. But when the user then interacts inside that particular component, so they press that particular button, we can then make a call out from our component back to then the parent page to say, right, I now want you to run these series of actions. Now, I know that we haven't covered actions yet, but there is an opportunity there. We can actually say, well, once the user has actually updated that particularly sticky note, we can then do something within inside the home page of our application. And of course, we'll cover that more as we progress through the actual series themselves. So let's now talk then about the actual component itself. So you can see here, this is the sticky note component. You can see that the component has a series of other widgets inside. We have the text, the icons, we have a container and an icon together, and then we have the text that represents the actual date that the sticky note was actually created. And of course, the container has got different colors, and of course, we can create these wonderful things here called component parameters. So component parameters will basically allow us to then dynamically set the values within inside each of those components. So here you can see I've got a description, I've got a date and a color. We've already discussed those. Those are the ones that's actually within inside our sticky note itself. And then of course we've got these on delete action and these on update actions. This is another component parameter that we can create, that when the user does do the delete or does then activate the update, then what's going to happen is a callback is then going to get performed, and then something is then going to be invoked on the actual home page that this actual component is in. So I'm going to spare you the complexity of that for now, because we're going to come back and we're going to cover that again in a later video, but I'm just putting on here just so you can see that the components do support the ability to do that. So just then finally on this particular slide, I'm really just summarizing it here, is that our component is added to our FlutterFlow page. We dynamically set the description, the date and the color, and we also set these on delete actions and these on update actions, and that will then mean that our component will then be fully loaded with the information that it needs, and then it will then be displayed to the actual page itself. So hopefully that was a little bit more insight then into components. We are now going to move on with this particular episode, and we're going to now start creating that left navigation bar component, and hopefully you'll start to see this kind of come to life, and all of this will hopefully sink in if this is new to you. So let's go and do that now. Okay, so we're back in FlutterFlow. Let's now create this component. So just a little tip here on the left-hand side here with inside the widget tree, we can obviously search for widgets as well. So that's why, again, it's another good reason then to have a good naming convention against your widgets. Now, I know I called this one the vertical note selector column. You can kind of see it here actually, but we can come up here and we can start typing in vert like that, and we can then find the widget that we need. So we're going to select this particular one here because this is the one that this column contains all of our child widgets. And what we need to do then is we can right click on it, and then we can say convert to component down here. So just hit the convert to component. It's now going to come up with this option for us to put a name in. So let's put a name in for our component. So I'm going to call this one new note selector component like that. So again, I'm putting the name of the type of this particular object at the end. So this is a component. Of course, if I was creating a page, I'd put the term page at the end. So that's just that naming convention I've got here. Hit the create component, and then here we are. We're now into this component view, and you can see here on the left hand side, inside this particular section, our new component has been created. Now it is actually located in the root of our sort of hierarchy for our components and our pages. I'm just going to grab hold of this. I'm just going to drag this into that particular folder there. So feel free to keep everything nice and tidy inside a components folder. So I'm just going to move it over here, and let's remove the search term that we had before that's persisted when we did that search on the home page there. And now you can see on the left hand side that I've got all of the widgets that we had seen previously on the home page, and they're now nicely kind of grouped within inside this particular component. So now we're in this kind of like design canvas now, where we can focus on working on this particular component away from the home page. If I was to just quickly go back to the home page, let's see what that's and how that is represented. You can see now that I've got this little diamond here that's representing a component. That's what it's called, and of course there is the name of the component. Now what I could do is I can actually rename this if I wanted to. So you've had lots of components that may be the same, feel free to rename them, because you can do that, but it will still reference back to the actual component that we actually have here. And of course I can now choose that particular component name, and then of course I'm now in Canvas again, where I can now start making these additional changes. Okay, so let's work on then the actual widgets that we have here, all of these circle containers, because they're no use to us like that. So what we're going to do now is we're now going to convert one of these now to another component. So we're nesting that component within inside a component. And again, we're going to do something very similar to that we did before. We're just going to right click on this first one. We're going to go down here and say convert to component. And now we're going to give our component a name. This is going to be called note.component, just like that. Hit the create component, and now you can see now that we've gone back into this view where we're just simply seeing that component on its own in the middle there. Let's go back to the note selector component. You can see here now that's now been converted. What we can now do is we can now delete these out. So just going to select those and hit the delete key just like that. So we've only got one in view. And what I can do now is I can right click on this one here. I can say duplicate and just do duplicate again, and just duplicate again until we have 5 of them come back. So right back to where we were, but now we know these are all components. Now we can just move up here. Let's move our note.component into the components folder just like that. So they're all nicely grouped together. Now what's really great here is, and just to demonstrate this one, I can come back to the note.component here. I can just click on the actual container. I can go down here. I can change the color of this to say, let's just put it to the tertiary color there. You can see here now that's represented here in orange. If I go back to the note selector component, you can see now that all of those components have now got that color. So that just goes to show that you can change in one place within inside the actual component. And if you've got the component spread through the whole of your application, then it will be applied right across the board. So that's looking good. We don't need to worry about the color because we're going to set that color dynamically very, very soon. Okay, so it's time to introduce you to component parameters, and we're going to use the note.component here to have some parameters set. So what we're going to do is we know that we need to dynamically change the color of this. So there's one really easy way of doing it, and that is by passing in a parameter into this particular component, and then the actual container itself can then use that value that's passed in from the component parameter to set the value of that particular container. So how do we do that? Well, up in the top right hand corner there, you can see we've got this option called component parameters. So just make sure that you have the note.component there selected, or at least no other kind of widget selected, and then you have access to that up here. Just hit the little plus here, and we're going to want to then hit this option called add parameter. So just choose the add parameter option. We need to give this parameter a name. So quite simply, I'm going to call this a color. And then the type, of course, these are now all of the different data types that this particular parameter allows us to set. Now, we're not going to go through all of these here at this particular point, but as we use and build this application throughout, we're going to be using a number of different ones of these. But the obvious one here, because we're working with colors, is one called color. So just choose a color here, and then that will set that type there. And that just will mean that this parameter won't really accept anything else other than us passing in a color as that particular parameter. So we know it's going to be required, so we're going to keep this as a required option here for us. We don't need to worry about whether it's a list because it's just a single item that we're actually setting here. And we can, if we wanted to, give it a default value. We can do that. Let's just hit that little option here. Let's just choose any particular color. Maybe let's choose the primary color here. This just up at the top here. So let's just choose that there. It really doesn't matter because we're going to be setting it dynamically. Just say use color there. And then what we then need to do is just hit the little confirm option. And then, of course, once you've now got that set, your question is going to be, well, how do we then reference that component parameter and set the color of that particular container? Well, that's really easy as well, because we just need to go over to the circle container here. Now, if we move down here, you can see that here we've got this tertiary color that we set earlier on when we changed the fill color. We need to use this little option here, this little selector that's just above that. If you just select that, now this now brings up a brand new kind of palette that we've not seen in this particular series so far. We'll go into in depth on some of what all of these actually are through the duration of this particular series. But very, very quickly, you can see that we have this collapsible section here called component parameters. And the one that we're interested in is this one here called color. So just choose that, and that is it. That value is now, or that fill color is now hooked up to that component parameter. So we can now set that value outside of this particular component, and we're going to do that in just a moment. So once that's done, that's good. We're going to set one other component parameter while we're here as well. This is more for a future episode, but we can do that right here. Let's move over to the component parameters again. Let's hit the little edit option up here, and then we need to hit the add parameter option. Just do that, and we need to give this one a parameter name, and we're going to call this one on circle tap action, just like that. Now this parameter needs to start with a lowercase a name here, so it's a lowercase o. And on the type, we're just going to select that, and we're going to go right down to the bottom here, and there's this one called action. So again, don't worry about what this means right now. We're going to come back and we're going to explain how all of that works later. But for now, just hit the confirm there, and that's all that we need to do. So let's now move back into the parent component, and then let's start now dynamically setting these particular values. Okay, so let's see now how these parameters are now accessible from the parent component. If you choose the new note selector component just there, and let's select the very first one in the column here. And if I just scroll down here on the right hand side, we've got this new section here called component properties here. And you can see here that here is the one, or at least the two parameters that we've actually created. You've got the color, and then you've got this on circle tab action. I'm not going to worry about this one for now, but on the color, I can simply come in here, select that, and I can choose maybe a color. Let's just say secondary there. I can choose the second component, come back down here, and I can then perhaps give this then a color. Let's just say the error color there for now, just for representation. So you can see now that I can independently set the actual colors of the component, and of course the container within inside the component is then picking up the value that I'm actually setting. So that is great, but that's not how we want our application to work. Now what we want to do is we want to configure within inside our application a number of set colors that we can then apply to these particular components. Now we could use styles within inside FlutterFlow, but actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to something called constants in FlutterFlow, which is going to allow us to configure in another section within inside FlutterFlow some fixed color values that we can then use when we start then applying the same color to our sticky notes, because the user is going to choose the red one on the left hand side, and we want the sticky note to also be red as well. So we're going to kind of future proof our build of our application here by creating these particular constants. So let's move over to that section now. That's another little check mark then on our kind of our fundamental learning path. So let's go and do that now. Okay, so on the left hand side here, we've got this option called app values. Just choose that. Now this is a section that we haven't been in yet in this particular series, but I'm not going to worry about app state, which is the one that's currently up there by default. We will be coming back to this in a future episode, but it's this one here called constants. And as you can see, the description says at the top there exactly what we need and what we're looking for to do here. It says app-wide constant values that can be used throughout your project. So these are fixed values that can't be changed at any particular point, and we're going to set them up right here, and then we can then reference those when we come to set the color of those particular circle.component parameters. So within here, we're just going to choose this option up here where it says add app constant. Just select that, and we need to give our constant a name. So we're going to do this one in a kind of like a sequential order. So we've got 5 different colors that we are supporting within inside our application. Of course, once this application is complete, if this is something you want to take forward, you can obviously create more than this, but we're just going to choose a 5 for now. So I'm going to, in uppercase, I'm just going to say note color 1 like that. I'm going to give our constant a name. Now the data type here, we know this is going to be a color. There's a number of different data types are supported here, but we just want to choose color, and we're just going to say create here. So that's now created it for us. Now here we can set our actual color. So I'm just going to select that. So I'm going to put in a very, very specific value here. Okay, so I've just selected all of the zeros there. E7BB42. There we go. So we've got like an orangey kind of yellow color there. So I'm just going to say use color like that, and I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to add another constant value, and this one's going to be called note color 2 like that. Choose the data type. It's going to be color, and I'm just going to hit the create. I'm going to go back in here, set the color. Okay, I've typed in EE8B60. So just hit use color there. Just say yes to that. Let's now add another one. Call this one note color 3 like that. Data type color. Hit create. Select the color. Select the zeros. 679CFF like that. Just say use color, and then add another one. Note color 4. Data type color. Create. Set the color 1C64FD like that, which is like a bluey kind of color. Just say use color, and then finally one more we need to do. Note color 5 like that. Set the type to be color. Say create. Let's just finally set that color. So FF5963, say use color. So there we go, just say yes to that. So there we go. So there is all of our values now set. Now let's now move back over to our parent component and let's start now applying these particular values. Okay, so let's now set those constants on our actual note.components. Okay, so I've moved over to the new note selector component. I'm just going to choose the very first one here, and I've just got it selected here. And just on the right hand side, I'm just going to choose the actual color option. Now we've got this new kind of palette that kind of gets displayed. Now you'll notice on there that FlutterFlow's actually detected that I had some constant values actually in the system. And you can see here I can just drop that little sort of option there, and it shows me all of the project constants that's available to me. Now I'm going to choose note color 1 and set that. Now one thing to point out here is because this is a design time environment, it's not going to pick up the colors, so don't be alarmed if you don't see the colors that we set against those particular constants on display. We won't see those until we actually fire up our application in test mode. So let's carry on going through now, choosing each of these, going to the actual selector and then choosing the next one in the list. So I'm going to choose number 2, and I'm now going to go through and do 3, 4 and 5. So just do the last one here, note color 5, and they are all now set. Let's quickly now fire this up in test mode and let's have a look and see if we see all of the colors that we set with inside those constants. So just move up to the top right here, click on the little lightning bolt, and then of course a new browser window will open up as explained in the previous sort of episode. And now of course we just need to wait for this now to build, and hopefully we should see those colors on display. Okay, here we go. Our application is firing up. Let's have a look and hopefully we should see everything that we need. There we go. Brilliant. We have all of our colors that we set with inside our application. So of course, it doesn't do anything yet, this particular navigation bar, but we're certainly getting pretty close now to having the whole of this section kind of completed. Obviously, we need to kind of add some interactive elements actually into this particular piece here, but we're certainly making good progress. So there we go. That's it for this particular episode. Hopefully you enjoyed that. That was a good insight there into components. We're now going to take our skills further into the next episode where we're going to carry on working on the build of this application, and hopefully we should start to make some really good progress soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.